The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
CJ, we know the matchup for the final of the Four Nations face-off. Canada versus the United States, round 2, a rematch after Saturday's classic. On a scale of 1 to 10, how excited are you for this Thursday night matchup?
25 out of 10, 100 out of 10. I mean, I don't know what number quantifies it, but it's more than 10 out of 10. I mean, I think I would have been that way anyway, but the mere fact that we had the game we did on Saturday night at the Bell Center between these teams, I've been very blessed to have been to a lot of hockey games everywhere, all over the world, big games, championship games, games with animus, games with hostility, games with a lot riding on them. And that it's instantly in the top handful of games I've ever attended. Certainly the first period, the closest thing I can compare it to is if you remember back at the 2010 Olympics, Canada and Russia played a quarterfinal game that had a lot around it. Obviously, quarterfinals is a nervy game because if you lose, you're out in that moment. It's on home ice in Canada, and Canada came out and took a 4-1 lead in that game and really ran the Russians out of the rink. That was when Ilya Bryzgalov famously gave a quote that they were like gorillas coming out of the cage. That's the only thing I can compare it to in terms of a game with lots of hype. And it was just like still just a holy shit. Like that was a holy shit first 9 seconds. And even after that, just a tight, tense game. Like the best players, so many of the best players in the world, just giving it their all, no shortcuts. Anyway, we don't have to relive the Saturday game. I know we're teeing up the Thursday game, but I want to make the point that because we had that Saturday game so fresh in my mind, it's added an extra layer of excitement, expectation, anticipation for this final. I love that it's in the States, in Boston, after the first matchup being in Montreal. It'll be kind of a scenario flipped kind of thing, although I'm sure lots of Canadians will find their way into that building too. And I'm hoping we get another great hockey game because the one we saw Saturday was really something special.
What the hell do you mean you don't want to relive the Saturday game? What the hell are you talking about? That game, we're going to talk about that opening 9 seconds for a long, long time. There are, I don't know if you saw this. I'm sure you saw this. 4.4 million people watched that game on ESPN.
And it's just in the U.S.
5.2 in the U.S. It peaked at 5.2 million. What the hell? People booed the American national anthem in Canada as we expected. Justin Trudeau was there. Some idiot walked around with some Trump 51 shirt. And of course, there was a hockey game to be played. There was so much riding into this game, so many different storylines. What the hell do you mean you don't want to relive Saturday? That's all I want to talk about on this damn podcast. Of course, we got to tee up on Thursday, but you were in the building. You saw everything that went on in that game, and you saw how it all played out from both of those sides. Like, this is a game that I think, even if the championship game goes the way that I think it'll go, we're going to talk about that game, I think, for a very long time in terms of just everything when it comes to this sport. Like, this is one of the most fascinating games I've gotten to watch, period. Like, we have to talk about this game.
Yeah. And let me tell you this, and I don't want to out the person who works in the NHL and has been behind the scenes a lot in the NHL, had the chance to be in the Canadian dressing room when the reporters weren't in there, and said that he said the scene was worse than what he's seen when he's seen NHL teams lose in the playoffs. Like in terms of just how quiet it was, how kind of awkward it was, how emotional in a negative way it was. And so, obviously any Canadian team comes to any of these events, and what do they all say? We're only here to win, gold or nothing. These are sort of the things that are the mantras that follow every Canadian team, men's or women's, para, anywhere around the world. But when you add it to the fact that Canada just got beat by the U.S., that the U.S., and I don't say this, I really don't mean this in a bad way, but the U.S. is strutting a bit after that win, right? I mean, their players are talking about it's our time now. And look they earn that right. I think you win the game, you can say whatever you want. I mean, they showed up, the American players, they said it themselves. They planned to have the fights. They initiated the fights. They backed it up. They found a way to win the game. very close game. I mean, it's a 2-1 game with an empty net goal. You know, let's not ignore the fact that Connor Hellebuck stopped, you know, just off the top of my head, he stopped Connor McDavid in the high slot in the third period. It could be 2-2 on that play. I mean, so the point is, look, that's what international hockey is. It turns on a knife's edge. It's so close so often when you get into these big games. But, you know, the U.S. are walking with a little bit of a swagger. And I just, you know, the Canadians are clocking all of that. And they still, you know, I think the U.S. have the right to believe it's their time, quite honestly. They have a lot of freaking good players that are right in their primes. This is their first taste, of course, doing this with the U.S. sweater on. Some of them were at the 2016 World Cup for Team North America, but this is the first time wearing their country's colors. I mean, I get where the belief comes from, but Canada is trying to win its fourth straight men's best-on-best tournament. If you count the 2010 and 14 Olympics plus the 2016 World Cup. You've got Sidney Crosby sitting at 47-6 all time wearing the Canadian sweater. He's the captain, playing with one arm in this tournament. He's got 5 points. You know, he just threw a big open ice hit on Mikael Granlund and scored into an empty net.
Oh my God.
As maybe the Finland game was certainly getting a bit scary for Canada after giving up 2 goals in a 5-on-6 situation. Man, this has got all the. We don't need Don King to promote this fight. You know what I'm saying? Like, we don't need, we don't need any, like, we don't have to get creative about how we sell this thing. Like, it just has everything sitting there right in front of you. And I'll tell you this, Julian, I'm still in Montreal right now, which is problematic. I don't know what degree anyone will be interested in hearing about my struggles to travel, but walking around in Montreal Sunday, the day after that game, like random people in the hotel, in the elevator, on the street, were just still buzzing about it. Like, you know, I feel really vindicated right now because I know you and I on this show have been saying that Four Nations was going to be worth everyone's time and attention leading into it. And I'll be honest, it's delivered beyond even what I expected to this stage. And even honestly, no matter what happens in the last game, if it's 7-1 for one of the two teams, I still think I'll feel the same way because that in itself would be a shocking result either way. And so I think that this has been really, really damn compelling. You know, I want to take my hats off to the players too. Like let's not get lost in all the bullshit here that we could get lost in. The reason this tournament hasn't happened is on all the people at the top end of the game, at the league. You know, at the NHLPA, you know, Don Fehr was there for most of the time when they tried and failed to have this tournament and that tournament and do this thing and that thing. And while we've dissected some of the imperfections of this event, some of the things it's missing, what they at least did is get players from the 4 top hockey countries together. And those guys were begging, asking, pleading, wailing, screaming for this opportunity. And they have made the absolute most of it. I mean, they have given it their all in the games. They've made it compelling. I've been around a lot of NHL events over the years, man. I can't remember the last time players were this accommodating when it came to the media. Like just as a whole, as a collective, every single day sitting down and doing what they can to sell and promote the game, to talk about it. It's just like the vibes have been immaculate. And I really think the people contesting it are the ones who made the whole thing. Like they wanted this and they made the most of it. And so it doesn't matter that they all just saw the trophy for the first time like 8 days ago. It doesn't matter that this event has no history and may have no future. This thing matters because the players decided it matters. It matters to them. They're playing like it does. And so, you know, it's actually more of a relevant competition than I expected because there's no but here. I mean, there's certainly, we can't say whichever team wins is the champions of the world because obviously there's other countries that didn't get a chance to throw a punch in the ring here. But this is something really special. And my goodness, again, no matter what happens in the final, like we're going to Milan next year in the Olympics and all the stories are fresh and new. We'll be flashing back to that Saturday at the Bell Center. We'll be flashing back to the Kachuk brothers turning into the Bash brothers and JT Miller getting involved right off the hop. Man, I'm going in every direction like usual, but it's just it's honestly so much like energy, emotion, excitement is coursing through me because this event has been that good. It's been so awesome to be on the ground covering it.
So what's it going to feel like for you? I know what's going to feel like for me. What's it going to feel like for you? I don't know when next the Leafs play, but what's it going to feel like for you when you have to watch regular season games for the next, month and a half leading up to the playoffs, where we have to get reacclimated to games that don't matter nearly as much as what we've been watching in this tournament, that don't have that same intensity? We'll have the trade deadline, but I'm prepared for a very big come down from all this after it's up. I'm not excited for it. This whole tournament. Just for a second here. This tournament, one reason why it's been so great, the players care, and it's this great simulation of playoff hockey, and that's why people enjoy the sport as much as they do. It has all of that packed into 8 or 9 days of this tournament. I just like you, I talked to guys and they were all telling me they were excited about it, but this has completely gone beyond my expectations for what this tournament was supposed to be.
I got a hot take. This is better than playoff hockey.
Well, okay. That is not a take I expected at all.
What makes the playoffs compelling, though, is it's a marathon, and you just watch, whichever team or teams go really deep and they're losing players and they're throwing themselves in front of pucks. And the hockey itself tends to get worse and worse and worse because everyone's so banged up and exhausted. And I can respect the hell out of that. And I respect how hard it is to win the cup. And I'm by no means arguing every single one of these guys. I will say this, would trade the chance to win the cup to obviously give up winning the Four Nations. I'm not saying it's 100%. More historically significant, but the games themselves, just judging the hockey is better. I've watched Connor McDavid play a lot. I don't remember seeing him get hit like he got hit by Charlie McAvoy in that game Saturday. Do you know why that is? Because you had Austin Matthews back checking like crazy, angled him off to the side in a way that almost never happens in the NHL, just because players either aren't skilled enough, aren't fast enough to even sort of force them to do that, or just aren't as committed enough because it's game 52 and they played the next night in Calgary and they played 3 nights later in Vancouver and then in Seattle, and on and on and on. Angles him off the side and McAvoy goes for it. I mean, I'm just using that as one very, very small example, but you have fourth liners in this tournament. What's Canada's fourth liner now? It's jumped around a bit. I guess Sam Bennett's line with Marchand. You got fourth liners that are first liners on pretty good NHL teams. Just again, it's not perfect. There's some players injured. There's some buts, but I mean, this is high level stuff. And certainly when we get Canada US, for Canada, it has to be great news. They're going to have Cale Makar back for Thursday's final, and they didn't have him in Saturday's game. Fortunately, Quinn Hughes can't be there for the US, injured and out for the tournament before it began. But I think the individual games are played at a higher quality than pretty much any playoff game you'll see. Now, I love the playoffs, so I'm not sitting here to kick dirt on that. I'm just saying that in a moment, in a one game, like this game we watched Thursday might be the actual best individual game we see till the Olympics next year. I mean, who knows? There's going to be more compelling storylines in the playoffs, and there's lots of great stuff, but this is as good as it gets. So anyway, that's my that's my hot take. Clip me and radio me, Drew or Justin or whoever's in charge of that. But I actually do think it's better in the playoffs, and the playoffs is one of the best things NHL has going on. And to answer your earlier question, what's it going to feel like? It's going to be shitty next week. It's going to be so weird. There's no way around that. But the good news is the playoffs are in the pretty near future here. I think there'll be a real focus pretty quickly. Once the trophy's handed out at TD Garden on Thursday night, there's probably going to be trades or signings. The business of hockey will pick up because, as we've talked about, we've only got 2 weeks to the deadline. And then so we'll get back into the flow of the NHL season. But I mean, there's going to be a letdown. How can we? The guys just can't go this hard, and they don't have as deep a teams. It's a cap league. There's all this reason, but I should just say, wherever you live, I would watch Thursday's game and enjoy it, savor it. Try to process what you're watching. Process the fact that teams are starting fourth liners with all-stars, and and they're gonna. I think the intensity and the emotion in that game is real. Like, I don't know what could top Saturday's game. Like, I don't think there's going to be 4 fights right off the opening bell or anything like that. There might not even be any. Like that might have just been a momentary thing that happened. But the stakes are so high, and I have to think there's even something close to H word in this. A little bit of hate brewing, a little bit, and I know some of these guys are going to go be teammates again. Matthew Tkachuk and Sam Bennett will be playing a game, and Sam Reinhart pretty soon again in Panthers colors, and Barkov will be back there, and Gustav Forsling, and they'll carry on just fine as Panthers. But the stakes are freaking high here, man.
Dog. I'll say this. There are only 2 things that were really missing from that Canada-USA game, and both of those things were unavailable due to injury. USA entered this tournament without Quinn Hughes, and he's not an option for them at all for the duration of this tournament. Cale Makar was unavailable for them on Saturday, but he returns to the lineup on Monday, and he looked electric. Like, Cale Makar, we get it. One of the best defenseman, as far as I'm concerned, in the game. If you want to interchange with Quinn Hughes, I'm not going to argue with you. I can't wait to watch this Thursday game and see what Canada looks like with Cale Makar healthy and available to them, because they could really use him for their offense.
Well, yeah, the transition in particular, right? Like, transition is important always in hockey, but when you have the kind of forwards these teams have, like, if you're transitioning the puck up from your blue line to those forwards, the odds of something good happen go up. I mean, you look at the game Canada played against Finland, like, they scored a few goals off the rush, right? I mean, that's quick breakouts, getting on the rush, making some plays in the offensive zone and scoring goals. They even got a forecheck goal in that game. Sidney Crosby went in and disrupted Urho Vakanainen off the puck and ends up setting up Nathan McKinnon's second goal. But, having Cale Makar there, it's just such a safety blanket. I think it's on 3 levels. I mean, who he is and what he is, number 1. Number 2 is he plays in the NHL with Devon Toews for the Colorado Avalanche. And so, it's not to be overlooked how beneficial it is to Canada to have that top pairing with such continuity and such comfort together. And then I think just the third level of it is you don't have to play the other guys quite as much. And I say that with respect to them, but, Cale Makar comes back in the lineup, plays 24 minutes against Finland. That's big for Canada. I mean, having him on the ice, not quite half the game, but say 40-something% of the game is a good one. And honestly, with a couple days of more rest now before the final, I mean, maybe you see him get 26, 27, 28 minutes in the final, like when the stakes are even higher. And so, that's a huge bonus. I think Canada certainly unlocks something by moving Braden Point up in the lineup, which is kind of interesting. Like, Point, when I was, all those sort of, mock rosters I had to do, I'll tell you, so I can't put myself in John Cooper's shoes, but what I can do is tell you, when you're doing those rosters, here was always the challenge. You had McDavid, you had McKinnon, you had Crosby, and you had Point, like 4 elite centers. And it doesn't, in my view, and obviously with what the coaching staff has done here, his view, it never really made sense to have any of them be the 4th line center. So you're moving at least one of those players to the wing. The question was, who would it be? So Sidney Crosby goes to the wing, but the top 6 still wasn't working. And so what does John Cooper do? He then moves Braden Point to the wing. And so you have 4 elite centers. Well, now you've got 2 wingers and 2 centers, making up Canada's top 6. And man, it's working well. You've got Anthony Cirelli now with the Tampa line with Brandon Hagel and Mitch Marner in the 3rd line. Sam Bennett, Marchand and Konechny on the 4th line. And all of a sudden you see it in that game against Finland, and it really clicked much better. Let's call it as is. Connor McDavid probably been Canada's best player in this tournament. I don't know if that's a hot take, but just the way he can back off the blue line with his speed, scored the opening goal in both the U.S. game and the Finland game, which are huge goals. I mean, to get a lead is huge. When you have your leader, offensive leader, scoring those goals, it's huge. McKinnon had a big night against Finland. Crosby on one arm is doing everything he can. He had a tough game, I thought, against the Americans. I wrote a little bit about it after that at The Athletic, but that take aged like old milk, left out on the counter because, there he is in the fifth. Yeah, gross. Yeah. Just goes to show you. I mean, I didn't go in on him, but I couldn't ignore the fact he played as much as he did. He wasn't able to take faceoffs. He had the turnover on the U.S. goal that was ultimately the winner. Just wasn't a typical Sidney Crosby kind of performance. But do you know why Sidney Crosby? The odd time he doesn't play up to his standard, comes back 2 days later, plays better. And it makes the game, it makes the one game that maybe wasn't so great less of a big deal because he's immediately back on the horse. Did you know, by the way, the Canadian team didn't get to Boston until 6 a.m. on Sunday?
I had overheard, I think Doug Armstrong mentioned it when he was interviewed by Sportsnet before the game, that his players had gotten in at 6 a.m. He didn't see them much of yesterday. He was trying to explain. Yeah, I had heard about that.
Yeah, well, they were originally supposed to fly Sunday morning after playing it's basically 8:30 local puck drop on Saturday night against the U.S. The snowstorm was coming in, so they moved up the charters and the players flew after the game, which is normal for NHL players. Of course, most teams travel after a game, but the problem was because of that blizzard, they had all kinds of trouble, getting away from the gate, getting into Boston, landing, deplaning, all that stuff, going through customs. Mm-hmm. And so they didn't get to the hotel till 6 a.m. Sunday, give or take. And they had to play Monday afternoon game. So, I mean, I thought Canada under those circumstances, because Finland was already there. Finland played the early game Saturday. They didn't have the same thing. Canada looked pretty energetic or energized despite, having that built into their time. And that preludes pretty nicely because I didn't even get off the ground. No charter flights for me. And I've had, believe it or not, Julian, had 7 different flight options canceled between That's Sunday insane. And Monday, which forced me to miss Monday's game. I mean, I saw it on television. I'm still in Montreal. Got a call from the Sheridan front desk. They said I can vote in the next election here now. I've met the residency requirement. So,
oh my God. Geez.
But I'm certainly not complaining. I even got on a flight, Julian, on Sunday. We leave the gate. Everything's normal. I bought a lunch. I was excited to eat my lunch once we got in the air. We get de-iced because it was a pretty big storm. We get out to the runway, we taxied, and at the last second, we sat there for a little while, and the captain's like, you know what? It's not safe. We have to get de-iced again if we're going to fly, go back. Long story short, flight gets canceled, plus a few others. Anyway, I'm still in Montreal, but I'm going on Tuesday morning at 6 a.m. with my TSN colleague, Ryan Rashog. We're going to drive down to Boston. So I will get there, but it was hard. It was hard to miss the game, but I mean, I don't think I was alone. A lot of reporters and family and friends of the players got stranded because, man, it's a lot of snow has fallen on Montreal in the last week. It's been real hockey weather here on top of everything else.
Yeah, just be safe when you're making your trek down to Boston, of course, and that extends to Ryan Rashog as well. Okay, we have to talk about Jordan Binnington. We know Team Canada in goal, that was always going to be seen as their weakest position group. Through the games we've seen Jordan play, hey, he's played his part in getting Canada to the final, but I don't know if he's inspired all that much confidence from a large group of fans watching Canada play. How would you, CJ, rate Jordan Binnington's performances to this point? And why is Canada so hell-bent on making sure that he plays these games, even if they did bring Aiden Hill and Sam Montembeault into the fold?
Okay, you might want to hold your desk here, Julian, because I have a feeling you're not going to like this take either.
I'm holding it.
Brace yourself,
I'm
my
ready.
friend.
I knew this was coming. I'm ready.
I do not get the outrage about Jordan Binnington. He has not stolen Canada a game, but in my view, he has not lost them a game either. And I don't like the goals against the U.S., especially the first goal to Gensel, like through the legs, tough timing. That was a 1-1 goal in the first period. And yes, it must have deflated the bench. And yes, I understand why people around across the country, across the land that care about what happens to the Canadian national team are looking at this and saying he does not inspire confidence. But I want to counter with, what the heck did you expect? It's not like this guy's winning the Vezina every year. I mean, the reason we've been talking about the state of Canadian goaltending is because there isn't a superstar player at that position that's Canadian. Even Logan Thompson, who's having a superstar-like year, you don't look at his resume and go like, holy shit, like if you put him in, like what would the other team do? And I say that with respect to Logan Thompson, but we're just in a spot in time where Canada was not going to have a goaltender that was likely to win the MVP or win the best goalie of the tournament. I don't know if they have all-star teams here, but you know what I mean? Like, Like, to me, Jordan Binnington's job is not to lose Canada a game. And well, it's been a bit white knuckle at times. I think he's done well under the circumstances. What he does well is this. He's a good puck handler, which again can play into the transition game. You know, he picked up an assist even in that US game, started the play, but before Connor McDavid got the breakaway, passed up to Doughty. Doughty found McDavid streaking through the middle, and he scored maybe the nicest goal of the tournament, certainly one of the nicer goals, if not the nicest. And he's a battler. Like, he lets in a bad goal, but he doesn't go to pieces. So I'll say this. The reason they haven't changed is because, are you that sure Adin Hill is going to give you something better? I mean, you're not changing goalies now for the final. I don't even think there's going to be a debate about that, but I understand there's a conversation before the Finland game among fans and media and the like. But to me, it's just such a short tournament, unless Binnington got injured or if he truly coughed up a game, which he didn't cough up the U.S. game. Honestly, Canada's got to score more than one goal. Like, there's just no way around that fact. And Hellebuyck was good in that game, but he wasn't. Like, it's not like Canada didn't test Hellebuyck enough. Like, if we, as we start breaking down this final in the days leading up to it, like, we're going to be talking about traffic. We're going to be talking about having more of a shooting mentality. I thought the Canadian team did that really well against Finland. They were just throwing more pucks at the net, trying to create havoc around there, because it was way too much east-west in the American game, looking for sort of perfect plays, perfect passes. And you look at that U.S. blue line, like they were awesome in that game. McAvoy played well. Werenski played well. Slavin, was just a total stopper for them. So Canada's going to have to find them. The good news is they have the experience of playing them. They have video now. But I think they're going to have to find a way. Like, I was watching the Canada-US game, and I was like, man, Zach Hyman could be used in this game. Like, they need someone who's sort of mucking it up around the net. I don't mean, like, hitting the opposing goalie or anything, but, taking away his eyes, giving him something to think about, and, potentially being in position to score almost like an ugly, dirty goal, which Canada really hasn't done a ton of in this event. I mean, Braden Point had a nice goal against Finland, just finishing off a play with a rebound, backhanded it in again around Lankinen. But Canada scored a lot of, frankly, nice, pretty goals, or sort of 2-on-1 type of plays where there's someone shooting it into an empty net because the pass was so nice. But I think they're gonna have to muck it up a little more. So anyway, all that said, Jordan Bradenton's been the second best goalie in the tournament behind Connor Hellebuyck, and I don't think he's lost Canada a game yet. But he's probably not going to steal them a game either. You're gonna need McKinnon, McDavid, Makar, Crosby, Point, all those guys to go out there and win you the game, most likely.
I think only one goalie to this point has a save percentage above 900 at this tournament, and it's Connor Hellebuyck. And yeah, you're right. Maybe Jordan Binnington's the second best goalie at this tournament, but he does not have a save percentage above 900. I just think there's been moments where he's looked a little shaky. And I don't think he's inspired that, and I don't think I'm alone in that. No, you're not alone in that. Like, you're representing the view. Like, I'm counterculture here on this one, not intentionally. Sure. Like, I'm not doing it. I actually believe it. I'm not just saying it to. Oh no, I know you believe it. I know you believe it. I know you believe it for sure. Absolutely. Late in the Sweden game, Binnington shut it down. He made a stop on Kempe in overtime. He made a stop on Zibanejad in overtime. Like, dangerous chances. They made some pretty decent stops in that U.S. game. Finland, it's a tough game. Canada's up 4-1 into the last 3-4 minutes, 2-6 on 5 goals. Like, I don't know how much to blame him. The team kind of got into like a weak defensive posture there. Like, look it's not Carey Price of 2014. Like, that was the most lock it down, feel safe about Canada's goaltending in my era. Like, there probably was better ones in maybe the 90s, the 80s, but I wasn't paying attention. But Carey Price in 2014 was the surest thing. What's funny is I was thinking about this, Julian. If you look back again, this is just in my time around, Canada has a history of switching goalies in these events prior to that Price thing. Yes, they do. You know what I mean? Like, it started with Curtis Joseph on Salt Lake City, and it goes to Martin Brodeur. And, Vancouver started with Brodeur and went to Roberto Luongo in tournament. Now, those are longer tournaments. Canada played 6 games in those Olympic tournaments. Actually 7, I believe, in Vancouver, because there's an extra game the way the format worked. There's only 4 games at this Four Nations tournament. But the plan all along was to pick a number 1 and go with him. And they picked Jordan Binnington. He's won a pretty damn big game in his life at TD Garden, I should point out. And a lot of people around this tournament remember that game. You've got Don Sweeney up in the press box, the Canadian GM, who was a Bruins GM. You've got
Doug Armstrong up in the press box, who's the Blues GM, who's with Team Canada for the Olympic team. You got Brad Marchand, who was against Binnington that night. You've got Colton Parayko, who wound up passing the cup, Parayko to Binnington on the ice at TD Garden back in 2019 when he won Game 7 there. And so he's got some good karma in there too. And I know that you're like, what's karma worth? But look at they've got some proof of concept that the chips can be down and this guy can get it done. Who knows? It may explode in spectacular fashion. Maybe this will be yet another CJ take that ages like, milk left on the counter if, when we see the game a couple nights from now. But I just think Binnington's the best of what they got under these circumstances. And he's their ride or die, man, for good or for ill.
Man, for his sake, he better not lose Canada that game. But to your point, against the United States over the weekend, Binnington can only do so much when you only score the one goal, and it's Connor McDavid with an incredible goal that I think he'll remember for quite some time. But when your offense is only able to muster that much, despite being the better team at 5-on-5, you need your offense to get going. They did that against Finland on Monday. But yeah, I won't put that entire U.S. loss on Jordan Binnington. The offense needed to be there. Exactly.
And, Canada, I'll put it this way. Canada needs to score more than one goal on Thursday to win the Four Nations tournament. It's that simple. And this tournament really hasn't featured a lot of power play time for any of the teams. So for Canada, I think you go into that game understanding you got to get the job most likely done at 5-on-5. Now, maybe it'll be a weird game. Maybe the emotion of it all will spill over and there'll be 5 power plays apiece. And, there'll be a chance for Canada's power play, which is pretty damn dangerous, to decide things. But, by and large, I think if you're entering that night, it's about winning it at even strength. It's about, finding a way to neutralize Eichel. The Matthews line in that Canada-US game was really good defensively. Canada didn't get a whole lot done against Austin. I know, a lot of focus on Matthews not scoring yet in the tournament, but, from a 200-foot standpoint, he was really good in that win for them. Dylan Larkin had a great game. Gensel's such a big game player. Man, the ice is just littered with game breakers. There's 7 guys on each team that if you told me they would have the big moment or the game of their lives in that situation, I would totally believe it. It wouldn't even be a stretch. It might even be deeper than 7 possibilities on each side. That's what makes that night so special. Just the possibility of all those sort of outcomes.
Man, I keep going back to the fights in 9 seconds. As someone who's very mixed on fighting, but also understands that it riles people up, and I got excited about that start too. What did you think of specifically just those moments, but also the story that came out after that? The Tkachuk brothers and JT Miller had a group chat and they discussed the idea of getting into scraps at the start of the game.
I'm a bit of a Neanderthal. So, I'm just saying I don't mind. I don't want stupid violence in hockey. I don't have time and I don't have time. We might debate this because you might say that was still a stage fight. Those didn't really feel like stage fights, even though obviously Matthew Tkachuk asked Hagel for a fight, right off the opening faceoff. And then all of a sudden Brady Tkachuk yells at Bennett, who was on the bench, and says, "We're going next." And Canada obliges, throws, because essentially they're not backing down. And then JT Miller to me looked like he was looking for a fight. He looked like he was, I don't know if he was trying to fight Cirelli, but they were lined up on the faceoff after the first 2, and he was sort of digging at him, and then he goes to the net and, fights a pretty, fights out of his weight class, I'd say, against Colton Parayko. Long way of saying, I thought it was amazing. I understand that we don't want that in every game. I'm not trying to advocate for things that get guys suspended 20 games, using your stick like a golf club or a baseball bat. I'm not arguing for the 1970s Broad Street bullies kind of tactics, but I do think that intimidation is still a part of the game. I still think that, there is a togetherness. Hockey is about togetherness. It really is a we before me sport. And as silly as it might sound to someone on the outside or someone who doesn't agree with fighting, I think being in it together the way the teams were in that moment was pretty unique. And I didn't expect to see that. Honestly, I didn't think there'd be a fight. Like, I thought we were going to see a game with lots of hitting, which we did, and tough play, and maybe some words and little, scrums after a whistle here and there, or, plays around the benches on either side where guys get mixed up. And we saw that. I did not expect to see a fight. And honestly, I'll say this right now. I don't think we're going to see a fight in the final. I just want to throw as many takes out there that are going to look terrible in 3 days, but, I don't think we'll see a fight in the final. So in the circumstances, I got no problem with it. The U.S. team wanted to send a message. It's hilarious to me that there'd only ever been 5 fights in sort of international best on best with the NHL involved. 2 of them happened in a Canada-U.S. game with Keith Tkachuk, father of Brady and Matthew, and Bill Guerin fighting on behalf of the U.S., who's the GM of this team. This is the Tkachuks are showmen, man. Like, what players they are. Obviously, you see Brady a lot living in Ottawa, but like this is part of what they do. They're big, they're skilled, they're unafraid to go to the net, they're unafraid to challenge opponents. They're unique players. Like, in today's game, there's not a lot of guys with the collection of abilities and skills that Tkachuks have, and have 2 of them on the same line is something. And Matthew Tkachuk, we should note, unable to play in the final game of the round robin portion against Sweden. Didn't play in the last 12 plus minutes of the game against Canada. Like, he's going to play the final, but how limited is he going to be is a question. Where I land on it is, we don't need to have a fight in every game. We don't need to have 3 fights in every game. We don't need group text to have big fights, but that was a once in a lifetime moment. And I thought, I think I'd be missing the mark if I had anything negative to say about that. I love what John Cooper said. I didn't see any fans running for the exits, which was true. That's true. As loud of an arena as I may have ever been in those moments.
Like, just watching it on TV with everything going on, that's one of the coolest atmospheres I've seen in any format you could have it. I just couldn't believe what I was watching. It felt like a perfect storm of all of these different storylines coming together at once, and it turns into this supercharged event. It felt like the fights were done. Did you have any conflicting?
I don't mean to interrupt you, but is you're more of a pacifist or just maybe non-fighting advocate? Like, did you have any mixed feelings about it? Were you excited? Were you punching air in your living room? Like, what was the vibe on your end watching that?
My vibe watching it was just like when I saw the first fight, I was like, oh my God. And then the second fight was it was just me saying, oh my God, but louder each time. Like, for me with fighting, I don't like the staged fights, but when chaos breaks loose and there's nothing you could do about it, then I'm like, well, holy shit, like, what are we in for? And that's what that felt like to me. It didn't feel like overdone. It didn't feel like, maybe I'm not articulating this right, but it genuinely felt like a chaotic moment. And what I was about to say was, considering everything that was just on the line with this game, and considering everything that just was seemingly felt in the air, those fights sort of felt like tension breakers as best as you could. It's like you have all that pent up energy and you're going into a game. Remember, we've talked about this, whether on this podcast or on our own platforms. The Tkachuks in particular, they've hyped up that matchup going into it as like the biggest game for them. Matthew Tkachuk said this is like the biggest. He'd been waiting to be in the game for like that for 9 years. Brady Tkachuk said that's like the biggest game of his life. It makes perfect sense considering the way that they play, that the first thing they're going to do is, all right, let's find some guy and let's beat the crap out of them. Like, it made perfect sense that they were going to start it that way. And as someone, again, who's mixed on this, it's like, well, how else could this have started, I guess, in a weird way to go about it? But like, it just felt like this supercharged start. And I still can't believe it happened. And I still think we're going to talk about this for a very long, long time. And I'm really curious. And this kind of goes into my next question. Like,
what part of this is, though, that we haven't got into? I will say that of the players, the American players, Matthew Tkachuk was the most openly bothered by the anthem being booed at the Bell Center. He was 100%
the most. He was.
Like, there was a camera angle of him. He was on the bench for the first game when they played Finland, and he looked like he was ready. Like, his eyes were bugging out of his head. And that was the game where afterwards he was asked about it at the podium, and he said, I didn't like it, and that's all I'm going to say, basically. And then, it happens again and he gets in that fight. And so, like, there's more going on here than just hockey. There's more going on than best on best hasn't happened for 9 years. Like, the U.S. was treated to a very hostile environment during their time in Montreal. It's nothing to do, I don't think, with the players. I don't think we have to get into the politics too much, but clearly the underlying tension around those games, was much bigger than what this event is. And it's about the moment in time we're in politically. But Matthew Tkachuk, I'm sure every player individually processed that his own way, but I think he hated it. Like, I think he took it personally, whether he should or not. And so I do wonder on some level if that was part of it. Like, he wants to, it's his way of fighting back against the crowd, against the whatever, when you boil it down, it's like heroes and villains kind of stuff sometimes. And I think, the U.S. were kind of painted as villains there. And I imagine, I don't know for sure, but I imagine some of the Canadians might feel that way now that this script's reversed and they're in the U.S. And I'm not saying that the political stuff is probably viewed a little differently from the U.S. end of this thing, but I think the Canadians will be booed pretty good at TD Garden in that final.
You just basically, you're touching on the next question I wanted to ask, which is, I wonder how that atmosphere is going to be with the setting being flipped. Instead of Montreal, you're in Boston. And those American fans who have been there, they've seen their anthem get booed, or they've seen what's been going on with the U.S. team over there. How will they respond? What will that atmosphere be like? I mean, there's only one way to find out. You have to be there to really feel what the sense of it is going to be like. But like, I have to imagine with what Saturday was like, maybe it won't start the exact same way, but you're going to feel some kind of energy in the air Thursday night, man. It's going to be intense.
Well, I've covered 5 Game 7s personally in my life at TD Garden. The Bruins are 4-1 in those Game 7s. The 4 wins came over the Leafs. The loss was to St. Louis in the 2019 final. I was there the night in 2013. Chicago clinched the cup there, but Boston had a chance to fend it off. I was there Game 6 in 2011 of the cup final when the Bruins smoked Vancouver and forced the series back to Game 7. I mean, I've seen just so many huge games in that building. For me, it's one of the loudest buildings in those moments. Like, and the fact that we're having 8:30 puck drops, like the area around TD Garden is, there's all these bars and restaurants. Like, I just have a feeling that will be a well-served crowd, we'll call it, getting in the doors there. They just ripped up like rock music and they drop kick Murphys and like, it's all just like, give it up to the and, so I just think that crowd will be just whipped into a frenzy. It's going to be awesome. Like, and that's so cool. Like, are they going to boo Brad Marchand in his own building? Like, have you thought about that?
God, like that's so wild. What do you do?
John Cooper started Marchand's line in this game with Bennett Konechny against Finland. Like, I wonder, because they do introduce the players individually for each team, the starters, and the U.S. players are getting booed, and that, like, maybe Canada starts Marchand, like, because it's going to make the crowd be forced to, plus you're trying to send a message in terms of, you want him to get in on a forecheck on the, finish a hit or two on the opening shift. Man, awesome stuff. I mean, all around. And we're only a year away from the Olympic tournament. I think an understate, like something that might be missed, and I wrote a column on this at The Athletic, so if you've read it, and I'm repeating myself, well, you get me on 2 platforms. But an underrated aspect of Canada getting into the final of this tournament is it gives them another 3 days together, which might not sound like a lot, but after 9 years, like, this is the first time, right? It gives them a couple more days to practice together, have meetings together, and then obviously prepare and play a big game together. And I think they can draw on all of that a year from now when they're getting together at the Olympics. Because the problem with the Olympics, the challenge, I shouldn't say the problem, is they're going to fly to Europe, all the players for every team, and then jump into a tournament, and you got no time to fix things if things aren't working. Really, I mean, small adjustments can be made from the coaching staff and the lineup, but really, you gotta start sprinting out of the blocks. And one thing John Cooper mentioned, he just said, like, can you imagine if we didn't have this tournament and we went and had 2 practices and went into the Olympics? Like, at least there's going to be some continuity here. And so I think, obviously Canada shows up to win the tournament. The players are only thinking about the 4 nations now, but I can tell you that there are Hockey Canada folks that have been the whole time looking at the big picture here. I'll tell you this, Julian, there was a meeting, at least one that I know of, where the coaches and the management staff went through isolated video of the players from this tournament to sort of critique their play, to think how are they handling this moment? What are we seeing? Like, this is part of the evaluation for next year. And so it's not as simple to say, hey, this guy struggled, he's not going to make the team. Like, there's still a year, right? There's still a lot of time to do good things in the playoffs, to show a lot, with your NHL team, maybe to go to the World Championships. But the evaluation is ongoing. The staff is getting to know each other, the training staff, equipment staff, all that stuff. And so even just getting 3 more days together, I think seriously makes a difference, because, had Canada lost to Finland and been eliminated from the tournament, I mean, everyone's leaving town. Some people maybe even as soon as Tuesday night, or Monday night rather, like right after the game, there was time to start flying to vacation. But, getting that extra time, you might look back if you're John Cooper or Doug Armstrong or, Scott Salmon from Hockey Canada and be like, it was actually good that we had this extra ability to get to know each other a little better.
Okay, one more thing before we get to Ask CJ here. We spent so much time hyping up Canada, talking up the United States. Can we just take a moment to appreciate the Finland-Sweden game on Saturday too? Canada, USA, they were always going to dominate headlines, but that was a really good game as well. And we both know about the rivalry between both of those nations and how much they don't really like each other. And they gave us a really good game too. And there was a part of me on Monday, with how Michael Granlund was making things very interesting near the end, that kind of wanted to see that game go to overtime. So that way that USA-Sweden game would have some kind of meaning. There was a part of me rooting for Team Chaos in that scenario.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I mean, look, the game was Sweden and Finland. 2 things to note. 1:00 start in Boston, meaning 8:00 start back home. So it was, one of the games of the tournament that you knew that Swedes and Finns could watch at a sensible hour, meaning you were likely to get real audiences. You have the rivalry built in that you mentioned. The game goes 1-0 Sweden, flips to 2-1 Finland, flips to 3-2 Sweden, back to a tie, and then ultimately Finland wins 4-3 on a Granlund goal in overtime. I thought Granlund had a good tournament here. He's a player, honestly, one of the more distinguished Finnish players. He scored a crazy goal when he was a young guy at the World Hockey Championship that was put on a postage stamp, Michigan-style goal in the Worlds. And, he's just been traded to Dallas before this Four Nations break. And so, it's hard not to think that, it's hard for me not to believe that, that's not a great pickup for the Stars. Unfortunate for those countries not to get the chance to play the final. But, this is a pretty merciless tournament. Sweden loses 2 games in overtime to start the event against Canada and against Finland, and then they're mathematically eliminated before they play the 3rd game against the U.S. So, the margins are pretty small there, right? I mentioned, Sweden had a chance to finish up, a couple chances to finish off that Canada game. They also had a chance against Finland, and it goes back the other way right before Granlund scores. And so, those countries have more familiarity. Like, some of the stuff I was talking about is a benefit to Canada, which I think applies to the U.S. Everyone just getting comfortable because, the bulk of the Olympic teams are here. There's going to be not the exact same thing on both sides, but enough of the same people will be there that I think this will have everyone be more comfortable. Swedes and Finns have a little bit more of that built in. They've played together more in the past. I mean, it's just those are smaller hockey nations in a sense. And, both those countries are going to be arriving in Italy believing they can win a gold medal no matter what happened at this Four Nations tournament. I mean, they didn't get to play on home soil. It's probably a little different. They had to only pick NHL players, which especially in Finland's case, but even maybe a little bit of Sweden, affected, maybe they might have a different roster. And so, they treated us to a good game. They treated us to other good games like Canada, Sweden right out of the box. A good hockey game. Set the tone for maybe the whole tournament. And so, yeah, it kind of looks empty because they've just played 3 games and go home. There's no bronze medals in a 4-team tournament, but I wouldn't sleep on either nation, A, building better teams for the Olympics, and B, showing up in Italy with every chance. I mean, the last time there was an Olympics played in Italy, it was in Turin in 2006. We had a Sweden-Finland final in the gold medal game. And so I'm not predicting that a year out, but could happen again. It's certainly not a stretch to say it's possible.
Can't wait for 2026 in Italy. That's going to be amazing. It is time for Ask CJ. We'll be taking your questions off of all the social media platforms where you can send us questions. I'm only going to give you a couple, Siege. Let's start with one from Melonbee's Dead Rat. How are the players compensated for the Four Nations tournament?
A couple different ways. So there's a small appearance fee paid to each of the 93 players now that played in this tournament, with Thomas Harley being the 93rd added as an injury standby for Team Canada. And so they were given a small amount of money kind of as a stipend. The winning team, whether you end up in the US or Canada, is paying for a little extra money. It's sort of a championship pool to be split among them. But, the real way they were compensated is, my understanding is, they did an excellent job here of taking care of the families and friends of the players. Players were allowed to bring their wives, parents, children, whatever your personal situation is, into Montreal and Boston. I heard a lot of raving about the way those people were treated. And so it's largely playing for love of country. It sounds like it's a very small amount of money, at least compared to what these guys normally make. I don't know the exact figures. But, you get to splash out on your family and friends. They get to have a good time. You get to play for your country. And so that's how it goes. Now, in the future, we have a 2028 World Cup on the docket. I think the goal will be for that to be more of a revenue generating event. And if there's more revenue, it's going to be more money paid out to the participants. But, this tournament is not that. And so, they're playing for kind of pocket change, if in pro athlete terms, which is not pocket change in podcaster terms, I can confirm.
Yeah. Good point. From Pascal, so far the Four Nations is great, but with the intensity going up and injuries creeping in, is there a risk that the NHL prefers not to repeat, given injuries to their best players mid-season is very impactful for the affected team compared to a boring all-star game with close to zero risk?
This is a behind-the-scenes an issue the NHL will have to deal with and manage with owners, because it's 100% a thing. Like, I talked with a pretty senior person involved in one of the teams who said, like, back home, the GMs and the owners are probably not thrilled about this. You had Shea Theodore play 6-7 minutes for Team Canada, and he's out for the tournament. Barkov hobbled off at one point. Matthew Tkachuk, there's two. I mean, that's two of the heartbeat players for the Panthers, getting injured, playing through that injury. Cale Makar, they called it an illness. Seems like there might be a little bit of an injury situation there as well. And there's probably other things I don't know about or might yet still happen in the final. So there's going to be players that go back somewhat weakened versions of what they were. And you have to submit to that, because, if Columbus and St. Louis play a game on a Tuesday night in November that has no hitting, someone can get injured in all kinds of different ways in this sport. And then you put it in this kind of environments, and with the intensity, how fast the games are, how physical they are. I mean, the risk of injury goes up, and the problem is every player on the ice is pretty damn valuable to his team back in the NHL. I mean, that's part of what makes the tournament great, but it's also where the risk comes in. So it's a fair question, and I'm sure there's some individual owners or GMs out there that aren't happy with maybe what they're going to get back once the players return. But this is what they signed up for. This is what the whole thing is. I mean, John Tavares was a young star with the Islanders in 2014 who broke his leg. Unfortunately for Canada at that Olympics. Dominic Hasek, the Senators were one of the top teams in the league in 2006. Hasek, was injured, I think, going into that tournament, played through that injury, came back and wasn't himself, and the Sens didn't win the Stanley Cup in 2006. So there's a proud history of this whenever you have in-season tournaments. The pro of the in-season tournament, better hockey. Everyone's more conditioned for it. I think it's great. The con, a team can have played 55 or 60 games and put itself in a certain position, and things might change quickly because of the national team break. I mean, that's just what hockey is at this level.
Very true. Giant Pie 12 wants to know how much of this tournament is Amazon filming.
I don't know if they're filming any of it, to be honest, but there is a lot of embedded.
That would be insane. That would be such a fumble if they didn't get anything. Don't let me speak. Just because I haven't become aware of them filming, there definitely are film crews behind the scenes. We've seen a lot of mic'd up content. Even the NHL splash that up from the dressing rooms and stuff on the ice. Yes.
So clearly there's a lot of behind the scenes content being filmed. I'm not aware of Amazon being part of it, but that doesn't mean they're not here. So I think the best answer to that is, we have another show in a couple days, and I will endeavor to get a firm answer on whether Amazon's here, because I haven't asked anyone and I haven't heard otherwise.
I would love to know, considering the one player we know that is supposed to be part of the upcoming season, is playing a very prominent role on Team USA right now, and played a very prominent role in that electric start between Canada and the United States. For those who did not,
and we know the Kachucks were both mic'd up in that game because there was footage of them talking in the penalty box after fighting to start the game.
Come on, like there's gold over there. Anyway,
you know what the most charming moment I witnessed of this whole tournament is, and it wasn't filmed by the Amazon cameras? I was walking over to U.S. opener against Finland on Thursday. That was the first of two massive snowstorms I've witnessed in Montreal inside a 3-day or 4-day window. And there's all this snow on René Lévesque, and there's the Tkachuk family, the extended family walking over to the game. And Brady's young son, who was born in the last few months, is in the baby carriage. And you have Keith Tkachuk carrying the carriage through the snow because the snowbanks are so big. The snowbanks are so big that you can't push the stroller through. It was just a sweet little family moment. And obviously, you can imagine the excitement there. I mean, that family's been lucky. They've had a lot of moments in hockey arenas in the last couple of years to watch with the Matthews, runs with the Florida Panthers. But it was kind of a neat moment. And then I was thinking of that when I watched the game, and Brady and Matthew each scored 2 goals apiece. I was like, well, that was worth the snowy commute for the Tkachuk family.
One last one for you. I think this has to do with an activity you got to do in the last few days. Did Our Lady Peace do any covers of Canada's actual great band, Rush? I think OLP, you were tweeting about how they were doing covers of the Tragically Hip. Clearly, Taylor feels Rush should have been included in their set list as well. Yeah,
so that NHL event where Our Lady Peace performed, which really called back to like 13, 14, 15-year-old CJ. I had a great time watching them perform. I left a bit early, so if they did cover Rush, I missed it. But they did do one cover of Tragically Hip while I was there, which was pretty cool. And they played I loved it because they played stuff off the Naveed album, which you got to be probably 40 or above and from Canada to even know what the hell I'm talking about right now. But they played stuff that wasn't what was their most commercial successful hits, but I think they played some of their better songs. And we're talking, I think that album came out like 94, 95. So it was speaking to me, but awesome to see OLP play. And really, honestly, the NHL and the NHLPA put on a great show at this event on the ice at events like that. And I'm excited for the last few days. And then you and I are going to be sprinting into the trade deadline together, my friend.
Woo! I cannot wait for that. I also can't wait for the ending of this Four Nations tournament. CJ, great job as always on this pod and with your work at The Athletic. Be sure to check that out if you don't already do so. Subscribe to our podcast for more great content as it comes. We'll be back later this week with another great episode of the show. And of course, we'll talk Four Nations. And if something happens in the NHL in that time between this podcast and next, we'll be on top of that too. NHL players, they get right back at it. The ones who aren't still at the tournament, by the way, they're right back at it on Tuesday, 2 p.m. practices. Am I right?
2 p.m. That's when you got to report after the Four Nations break. There'll probably be some heavy legs there from the guys who were on the sandy beaches or the golf courses or doing all the stuff that they should do, frankly. If you get a break from work, you should take a break, but I'm sure it'll feel like big back to school vibes for those who've got to practice for the next 3 or 4 days.
I'm inclined to agree with you, Siege. For Siege, I'm Julian. So long. We'll talk to you all later this week.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.